Welcome back, everybody. I got Jeff Benedict here with me, previously a radio host at 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. He's back on the FF Metrics podcast. His Twitter handle is JMB_CU16. Go follow him on X for all the latest news around the Falcons. And if you just want to watch someone snap at haters on X, Jeff is your man. So he's very entertaining. I definitely recommend the follow. Jeff, last time you were on the FF Metrics pod in March, you were the first person to hint that Atlanta might be going quarterback. Nobody in this business is 100% right, but Jeff is more right than wrong. So we got a packed agenda today. Jeff, I want to start at the top with free agency because news just broke out that Trey Hendrickson has officially been granted permission to seek a trade. And I believe that Terry Fontenot was in the building when Hendrickson was drafted by the Saints. And Jordan Schultz said that the Commanders and the Falcons have been watching this situation closely. To the best of your knowledge, do you think the Falcons are in on Hendrickson?
Yeah, so I mean, I do know for a fact that the Falcons have when this kind of coming into this period here post Super Bowl, the Falcons have had talks, and I've said this for a while. They've had talks with the Cowboys for Micah Parsons. They've had talks now that I know of with the Browns for Myles Garrett, and I know for a fact they've had talks with the Bengals for Hendrickson, right? And it is. I've been told that they believe that Micah Parsons was the most obtainable, based upon what they thought trade value was going to be, or what teams were going to ask for. And then overall availability. So this changes things. But yes, I mean, that is definitely one of the names that the Falcons have absolutely been trying to entertain and would love to add. So the fact that the Bengals now are willing to trade him, and I mean, maybe this changes everything.
Yeah, definitely. And the Bengals are typically a more stubborn franchise. So the fact that they actually let him go seek a trade is kind of surprising to me. It's all probably going to come down to trade compensation, though, right? With Garrett probably commanding the most draft capital in return.
100%.
But do you have any sense on that?
For me, that I don't, right? So I don't know what teams are asking for. I don't know what the Falcons are going to be willing to give up 15th overall. Right, like they are willing to give up, and I said this last year in real time as this was unfolding. Tier of pass rush, that second tier pass rush, and then that top 5 or 6, then that next 5 to 6, and then that next 5 to 6. Right, so they wanted the head coaches to identify kind of those top 3 tiers when it came to pass rush. Because the Falcons knew that they were going to have to do something about this pass rush, right? And you can go back and look. I mean, they've been bottom 2 in the NFL now for the last 7 years, right? And it's no coincidence they haven't made the playoffs in 7 years. So they were wanting to address that position. They were wanting to address with a bigger name. Right. And when you look at the NFL today, right now, the 2 biggest names are obviously going to be the first 2 that I mentioned, right? The Micah Parsons and obviously the Myles Garrett, right? Like you're not getting any better than Myles Garrett in this business. And Micah Parsons is obviously the younger of all 3 of them. And has probably the bigger upside because he hasn't realized anything yet. But when you look at Hendrickson, now you're talking about a guy who's the older of the 3. Obviously been around, he does have ties to Terry. What are those ties? I don't know. But what are all 3 of those teams going to ask for? You know damn well they're all going to ask for 15, right? I mean, the Bengals are going to ask for 15. They may not get it with Hendrickson because, again, he's 30, 31 at this point. He's on the kind of like that last leg of the career type thing. Will they give 15? I think Falcons become number 1. The Falcons are willing to give up 15 for him because there's probably not going to be a whole lot of teams that are willing to give up that upper to middle first round pick for a guy like Hendrickson. Yes, he's coming off an all-pro year, right? Like he had a great year. Hell, his last couple three years have been really, really good, right? But he's also, again, 30, 31, right? So like you're kind of doing a balancing act there with how much more time does this guy actually have left versus, how much are you going to give up? So it'll be interesting to watch. And again, I do know that the Falcons have had conversations in the last, couple months in regards to what, if he was available, what it would take. So I think those preliminary understandings are already in place. And I think it's just now going to come down to player preference, right? Does a guy want to go play for Dan Quinn and the younger Jaden Daniels and a team that just lost in the NFC title game? Or does he want to come to Atlanta where all of a sudden now things, and I mentioned this, a month ago in that report, a couple weeks ago when the report came out, right? The whole NFL player grade, right? Like I think when you see the Falcons did a complete 180 in a year, right? Like where they were under a player's perspective under Arthur Smith, where they are now under a player's perspective under Raheem Morris, right? And it's clearly night and day. And so now you start getting into those conversations of, damn, how many of those guys want to come play for the Falcons, right? The newer facility, not the, I guess facility, sure, but the newer locker rooms, right? A owner who is going to do what it takes to win, right? One of the handful of owners in the NFL who has a private plane that the team travels on, right? Because not all of the NFL owners have that. The Falcons have two. You've got an owner who wants to win. You have an owner who has one of the nicest stadiums in football. They have one of the nicest locker rooms in football. They've got one of the nicest facilities in Flowery Branch in football. And now you have a players coach that guys love. And that's going to weigh in on some of these as well. Going to a place where, yes, you're potential to win. And I forgot who it was that talked about this the other day, actually with Micah Parsons, right? I forgot the podcast that Micah was on, but he said to him, look, man, I'm a Falcons fan. And again, I wish I could remember the name. I actually saw it this morning, actually on my plane when I was coming up to New York. He said, look, I'm a Falcons fan. Falcons, and sorry, it wasn't Micah. My bad. It was Myles Garrett. So I think it happened was it in Indy?
I think it was during the combine. You're right.
Right. And he said, I don't know if you saw the clip or not, but he said, look, Falcons are probably a really good pass rusher away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And Myles Garrett didn't have no thank you. He had a kind of a excuse language, a shit-eating grin on his face, right? Like he was like, yeah, it's probably a team that I've quietly had a conversation about, right? Like the reaction was not, no, not the Falcons. The reaction was maybe, right? So you're starting to see some things kind of turn in the Falcons' favor. And so you start to look at these top three guys that everybody's going to want to add. The Falcons are going to be in the mix because they're going to be willing to part with some picks that maybe some other teams aren't. But they're also going to be a place where some of these guys are going to want to come play. And that is something that we have not seen since we had Dan Quinn, and kind of the top of that 2016, 2017, 2015 type years. We haven't seen it since then, right? Like players don't want to come here. We've missed out on some dudes. We can blame taxes. We can blame whatever you want. But the Falcons were not known as a destination, right? And kind of the dirty secret in Atlanta that we've all talked about for a long time. A lot of these dudes live in Atlanta during the offseason. These same guys don't want to come play here, right? And now you're starting to see some of those things turn. So these next couple of weeks, I think, are going to be really, really interesting.
For all of Raw's faults coming like with clock management, not starting Penix earlier last season, clearly Kirk, something was off with him after that New Orleans game and he was probably injured. Players love to play for him, and he's definitely changed the culture in Atlanta. Hopefully all the other stuff he could learn and get better at. Again, like this was his first head coaching stint in more than a decade, so there's going to be a little bit of rust, and hopefully there's none of that. There's no more excuses in 2025 when it comes to certain situations that we are in. So speaking of the coaching staff, though, our DC comes from the New York Jets. He was the interim head coach there, Jeff Ulbrich. He was also the interim DC when Raw was the interim head coach in 2020. And there have been rumors about some Jets free agents. I don't know how credible they are, about potentially, joining Atlanta as well, following Coach Ulbrich. So, Jeff, have you heard anything about Jermaine Sherwood or DJ Reed possibly joining the Falcons?
I haven't. So those are not names. I mean, I have not heard any of those. Again, doesn't mean that they're not. There's not going to be interest. I think there's going to be interest, especially because you look at it. Ulbrich was really popular up there, right? Like the guys liked him, and I get it. Atlanta Falcons fans are kind of timid because he was part of that regime that got fired in 2020. Here this last year with the Jets. That defense went from top 5 to bottom 5, literally in a year. And Ulbrich has addressed it. He said, "Look, man, I probably took on way too much. I was trying to do both, and in this league, you can't do both, right? And there are very, very few guys in this league that can be a head coach and also continue to be, a play caller, whether it's offense or defense, right? And, the McVays come to mind. Obviously, his run in LA has been incredible this last 10 years. You look at what's his name in Kansas City, 3 straight Super Bowl appearances. Andy Reid, but again, an all-time great. But even you look around the NFL though, and even Bill Belichick didn't do both, right? So Ulbrich, said if I had to do it again, I would have given up the defense. I would have concentrated more on actually being the head coach on the day-to-day basis than trying to do both. And it made sense, right? Here's a guy that, let's be honest, the Jets really fucked that thing up by letting what's his name go, because there was no reason to fire him. There was zero reason to fire him, right? And a guy who's going to get another chance at some point here soon of being a head coach in the NFL. Isn't going to have to deal with the Aaron Rodgers drama, and is going to be. I thought he was a hell of a head coach, right? And I thought, despite all of the nonsense, he was able to do some pretty good things with a really bad franchise, right? And so Ulbrich kind of stepped into that mess, and it was a mess, right? Like that franchise, Woody Johnson allowed Aaron Rodgers to, has he earned it? Don't know, but he allowed him to run that organization, and it ran it into the ground. And Ulbrich was trying to keep it straight. And I think Falcons fans are people in Atlanta want to win, right? And they want it really, really badly. And because if you're a Falcons fan, it sucks to be able to talk to Saints people. And Saints people love to throw out that 2009 or 2010, whatever that nonsensical Super Bowl win they have is, but they still have one, right? And so, I think Falcons fans are kind of gun shy when it comes to bringing in coaches that haven't had a lot of success, right? And I do think Ulbrich is going to be a guy who will attract some of those free agents, some of those guys who want to leave New York, some of their upper echelon guys. But it still comes down to right now for the Falcons, you want to. And I tweeted this out last week. My own personal opinion, it's not my sources telling me. I think the Falcons address pass rush in free agency. I think they address other defensive position needs in the draft. So I think you will see them try to address the pass rush first, and then other things will start to kind of fall next week. So if some of these more higher name free agents want to join the Falcons, it's probably going to be near the end of week 1, week 2 of free agency, which starts, was it next Monday? I guess legal tampering starts next Monday. And then what is it, Thursday or Friday when they can actually start signing guys. So I think you'll start to see the Falcons are going to be in conversations for some of these guys. But I wouldn't expect a whole lot of these names to actually agree to any type of deals here in Atlanta until they're able to identify and address that pass rush.
Jeff, before we move on from free agency, this is just your personal opinion, not your sources. Between the 3, Micah, Garrett, Trey, if I told you Falcons are getting one of them, which one would it be?
So if you'd asked me this question 7 hours ago, to me, it would have been Micah Parsons, right? With Hendrickson now being allowed to look for a trade and facilitate a trade, I think he jumps up to number one, to be honest with you. Because when you look at the total package of what it's going to take, I think he now becomes the most obtainable, because now the Bengals have basically said, okay, fine, you don't want to be here. We don't, go get a deal done then, right? And so my answer would have been completely different depending on when we recorded this, right? So I think Hendrickson probably becomes one. I think Parsons at two, and I still think Myles Garrett, despite that shy grin, when the Falcons were mentioned, I still think he's the most or least obtainable, because what it's going to take to land a guy of that caliber. It's going to take 3 or 4 firsts, right? Like, it's going to.
Oh my God.
I mean, you don't think that the guy that really should be probably the 2 or 3 time defending defensive player of the year isn't going to command, again, like the Browns have been so bad at signing players. They're gonna want to try to do whatever they can to reverse their fortunes with the Deshaun Watson stuff, right? Like, they gave up 3 first-round picks to go get him. They're going to want that back for a guy like Myles Garrett, who's far better than Deshaun. Unfortunately, will ever be. And that hurts my heart as you see my son's national championship Clemson rag behind me, right? We are big Clemson people, so I have Deshaun's back, and that's a whole different conversation to have, right? But like they're going to want to recover some of those things that they gave up to go get him. And here you've got that golden goose in Myles Garrett. And maybe the Falcons aren't willing to part with 3 or 4 first. Somebody might, right? So somebody that will want to bring in, and then, then you got to pay him. And Max Crosby just signed a really nice extension to stay in Las Vegas. And so you start to look at that market, and a lot of teams are going to be priced out of those things, right? And so, can the Falcons clear up some space? I think across the NFL, I think the Falcons were like number one in teams that are able to create the most space by making moves, restructuring, doing some things. And so I think you'll start to see some of that happen once they can zero in on some people. It may cost them a fan favorite. Grady Jarrett may not come back. But that's guy number one where it comes to being able to open up some draft capital. I think the Falcons are doing a really good job right now of downplaying Kirk Cousins. They're not going to take a stupid deal on this. They're not going to get rid of him just to get rid of him. Like you see a lot of people reporting this. I've said from jump that they were willing to keep him. The Falcons have come out and actually verified that they were willing to keep him, because ultimately you're only talking the difference between what they owe versus what they can get out of about $4 or $5 million, right? Like it's not a $40 million difference if they traded him post June or before June 1st or whatever that magical mythical date is, right? Because ultimately you're talking about a $10 million difference for that roster bonus. So even if they were to trade him before that roster bonus is due, they're still going to have to go out and sign a backup quarterback for $5 or $6 million anyway, right? So like you're still now again, you're back within that $4 million range. So the Falcons are like, we are not going to be bullied into a deal. We're not going to be on the hook. We're not going to send him to Tennessee or to Cleveland and be on the hook for the majority of his salary. We're not going to do it. And there'll probably be some teams like, hey, we'll take him off your hands, but hey, by the way, you still got to pick up 80% of his salary, right? Falcons aren't going to be bullied into any of that nonsense. So they're willing to keep him. Yes, I get it. Kurt has a no trade. Kurt has come out and said, I want to be a starter in this league. So, he'll probably make that no trade. He'll probably waive that if he can go into a situation and be the starter. And sure, there are only a handful of teams that need a quarterback and can afford to pay a quarterback like that. But the Falcons, he's in their plans right now. So there's so many different moving pieces, so many different things that have to happen with this franchise. But yeah, these next 10 days to 2 weeks are going to be really, really interesting.
Interesting point you bring up with Kirk, and that's definitely top of mind with everybody. And the thing is, we already owe him a certain amount of money. So whether or not we release him or trade him, that money is going to be recognized on the cap, right? We're going to have either a $40 million cap hit this year, or if we trade him post 6-1, I believe it drops down to 37 and a half. Jeff, do you know whether Atlanta would entertain taking on more salary? Fine, we'll cover almost everything in 2025, but that means instead of a 4th-round pick, now you give us a second. Have those conversations been happening?
Those conversations have happened, yes, 100%. But they're not going to publicly come out and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, right? Because I think right now the thought process is teams, there's a belief around the NFL that the Falcons really do want to get rid of him. And they're fine with sitting on him, right? Like, you have a young guy in Michael Penix, who, by the way, does have an injury history, whether people want to downplay that or not. But Kurt was the consummate professional last year when they made the change. Was he happy with it? Absolutely not, right? He's a competitor. No matter what you want to say about Kurt at 35, 36 years old, he's a competitor. But that dude, he really was a great teammate for Penix. When Penix, had success on the field, Cousins was the dude, that first one there, that was there to celebrate with him, right? Was there to prop him up, was there to say, hey, young guy, make sure you watch this. Make sure here's what here's what you need to look for, pre-snap, things like that, right? So he's been a great professional. He's been a great teammate. He's been a guy that Penix can kind of lean on. And, was that the role he envisioned? Nope. If that was the role that he had been told about, he wouldn't be here. That was never in the cards for him. But he's done a great job of being like, you know what, this is the situation I'm in now. And so, again, the Falcons, they're in the driver's seat. No matter what somebody wants to say, that no trade clause is there. And the Falcons are going to use that, right? Like, sorry, he's got a no trade. We're not entertaining this. We're not, excuse me. We're just, they're content with where he's at. And, with he's, to your point, the money's on the books, right? And so, if you want us to pick up a higher percentage of that, we need that second round. We need that third round. And there will be teams, we know there's going to be teams that will be desperate enough to waive that as they get closer to the season. So it may be a post-June 1st thing where they pick up an additional draft pick next year, which would probably be just fine, right? So it's interesting, but it's not a dire situation. It's not something that is going to immediately impact this franchise. They're just not in a rush when it comes to getting rid of Kirk Cousins. It's the NFL, right? Like, I mean, you're one play away from your season. Ask the Jets, right? Like, you're one play away from your quarterback going down, and he may never, Penix may get hurt before he ever throws a pass here in his sophomore season. And it's really good to be able to have a veteran guy like Kirk Cousins, who you're already paying for, have him ready to go. And can insert and step in and continue to be that leader, and then obviously give you something more on the field than you would have if you did go out and sign a guy. The name that's been circulating. Former Louisville quarterback.
Bridgewater.
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater. Right now, all of a sudden, like, the Falcons are like, oh, well, if we get rid of Cousins, let's go sign Bridgewater. Because that's the sexy name right now. So, it's the Falcons just aren't they're not in a situation where they're going to rush to move him. They're going to wait this out, because the longer they wait, the more it benefits them.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe somebody gets injured in the preseason, and that, causes a team to be more aggressive. But I like your point to, Penix being injury prone. I think he's tore his ACL twice in college. So
yep.
Even though he lasted 3 games, we don't know how he's going to hold up over 17 games. And with Caleb McGarry as his blind side for 17 games, I'm not really holding my breath. But speaking of the offensive line, Jeff, we've got another pending free agent, Drew Dalman, who's been rumored to get who or actually command at least $20 million per year on his next deal. Do you think he sees that in free agency, or does he come back to the Falcons on a cheaper, maybe like $15 million a year deal?
I don't think he comes back to the Falcons. I think when you look at what is going on with the Falcons are more than happy to bring back or have what's his name that played for Dalman last year when Dalman was Newsel, right? Like they actually liked what he gave, and so the Falcons are in a situation where do they want to bring Dalman back? Of course they do, but are they going to give? And I always feel like I jump around with you, so I'm sorry. People are kind of like Dalman's one of these really weird things, right? Like as a former offensive lineman, I understand the continuity of how and how important it is to have that up front. You have a guy who's essentially going to be a rookie quarterback. Having a veteran center that you've worked with for a year matters, right? Having a great center, and he's not Alex Mack, right? So like let's get that out of the way now. Mm-hmm. But he's a veteran guy. He's got 4 or 5 years under his belt. He's been very good for you. And while I don't believe in the PFF marks, right? I think PFF is trash. Sorry, I do. I'm not a fan. I know too many players. Players don't think highly of PFF. And when you look at like grades from the teams themselves versus what PFF has, they're always very different because ultimately PFF has no idea what responsibilities are day in and day out of every play, right? So, but PFF loves Dalman, right? PFF has him as the second best center in the NFL based upon grades of last year. Is he a top 3 center? No. Does he want to be paid like the top center? Yes. And the Falcons just again they're happy with what Newsel gave them last year, and a team that has a lot of holes on the other side of the ball, they're not going to give Dalman that 12, 13, 14, $20 million deal. It's just not going to happen. So I think the Falcons have already made up their mind that they're going to move on from him because he's going to command a number that they're not willing to pay because they do know that they have another guy that has taken some snaps for them, played pretty well. And, when you're sitting next to Chris Lindstrom,
you look pretty good.
Yeah, hell yeah, you do. So, wish him the best. And I was vocal of this the other day on Twitter. Like, I think bringing him back is smart. I don't like the fan perspective of like, we don't need him. Yes, you do. Like and only because of continuity standpoint, right? Like having the guy who literally touches the ball every single play matters. And there's only 2 players who do that, right? And potentially, actually, depending on what you run offense, the center's the only guy who touches the ball every single
snap.
Play,
yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then 90% of these offenses, the center is the guy who's setting the blocking scheme for the offensive line, right? Typically, when you look at whether you're talking higher level college or NFL, the center's the guy who knows what everybody across that line is supposed to do. And most times is that guy setting that blocking scheme, who they're, the responsibilities of most guys, right? And so it's a really important position. And I think, again, as a former offensive lineman, people don't understand the nuances of just how important those 5 guys are and how much it means to be able to keep that game in and game out. And typically, if you look at playoff teams, typically it's the top 16 teams who had pretty good continuity up front on the offensive side of the football because it does matter. If you're trotting out, 14 different starting lineups of your offensive linemen in 17 games, you're probably not very good, right?
Sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say, for the people that don't understand the importance of center, just look at Matt Ryan's stats right after Todd McClure retired, right? Then he kind of went into slump 2013 to 15. Mm-hmm. Granted, the team was kind of evolving and more, there were a lot of, other factors at play too. But then Alex Mack comes through the door in 2016. A lot of people thought that Kyle Shanahan's offense in 2015 required 1 year of burn-in, but I think Mac joining All-Pro center helped Ryan really elevate his game. So if Newsel might have looked good in a stretch during the season last year, but we don't know how he's going to look in 17 games. So if Dalman can come back at a reasonable deal, I would love it as a fan. But I understand that the Falcons want to allocate that cap, take a gamble at the center position, and try to go for defense.
100%. And when you look at that, that lull between McClure and Matt Ryan was then tasked with setting up the blocking schemes, right? Like that was one more thing you asked your quarterback to do. And when you brought in Alex Mack, he took it off that plate. I got this. Let me handle this. I'm the All-Pro here. Let me handle what I do. And so that really does matter. And that's going to matter a lot to a guy like Michael Penix, because teams are going to throw a lot of shit out at him, and it's just not. He's probably not going to be ready for a lot of it, right? So I think it is important, but again, I think the Falcons are also content with their backup plan, and they're not going to be bullied into paying a guy $20 million, right? Like that's all of a sudden you're starting to see that number for Dalman, and again, Dalman's been good, but he hasn't been
not $20 million.
No, hell no. And so that's allegedly the number his reps are going out for, and that's their job, right? Like their job is to publicly put it out there or to go get him as much money as possible. So I'm not mad at either of them. I just think it's really simple money to go, we don't need him, right? Like just the center, it's just an offensive lineman. We don't need him. And because that seems to be the reaction a lot, because it does matter. But I think the Falcons are content and happy with plan A or plan B.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's move on to the last big move that could potentially happen in free agency, Kyle Pitts. So when the offseason first started, I felt like I saw a lot of negative reports on him, that the Falcons are shopping him, that they're for sure going to move on from him. But now I'm starting to see comments from Terry saying stuff along the lines that they're excited about him. They think he's going to improve. And Kyle Pitts really, it's after that Tampa game, right, where he had that infamous run to the end zone where he sort of let up on the ball and almost fumbled the ball out of bounds. Fortunately, it wasn't called a touchback, but it couldn't have. But it could easily have been. After that point, he really hit a wall during the season, and he was barely targeted. I think his snap count dropped all the way down to 50%. Before that, he was playing 70% of the snaps, so he was clearly in the doghouse. And even when Penix started, I understand that he might have had the catch of the year in Washington on that 4th and goal or whatever from the 20, where Penix just drilled it to him. Fine, he had that incredible catch. But the game before that against the Giants, he kind of played hot potato with the football, and it resulted in Penix's first interception. So you see a guy who flashes time to time, and then you get all these lackadaisical plays that you go is this guy giving it all his 100% effort? Jeff, what's your read on this? Is he going to be an Atlanta Falcon come opening day in 2025?
So I want to bring to your attention, right, this last season in 2024, that 4-game streaks in weeks 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? So Tampa, Carolina, Seattle, Tampa. Okay. Pitts had 27 targets, 21 catches for 315 yards. Okay. That is, if you put that over a season, that's 1,400 yards receiving, right? You had that 4-game stretch where all of a sudden that dude was involved, right? And you're like, holy shit, here he is, right? Because 1,400 yards receiving for a tight end, you're getting the guy you thought you were drafting 4 years ago, right? And so you start to get excited because it's in there. And I think that's what really pisses off a lot of people is it's in there. And then you see kind of the last 4 games where he was I'm done. Is there a hot dog available somewhere around here? Can somebody hand me a beer? I really don't want to be here, right? 2024, you saw both sides of it. You saw a guy who was ready to look like he was ready to finally take that next step and become that great NFL tight end, that unicorn that everybody thought he was, to, I dropped the football. Sorry, bro. I guess that's an interception for you. Sucks. Right. So you saw both of those things, right? And so, of course, Raheem Morris is going to say, we're excited to have him, because they do, right? Like you're not going to shit on a player coming into the offseason when you're expecting him to be in the building. You're expecting him to participate. You're expecting him to be a part of the future because he's under contract, right? Even though it's just a 1 year guaranteed, what is he getting? 11 or 12 million, whatever he's getting this year for that guaranteed fifth year. He's still a part of this team, right? And so they're going to continue to talk about him like he's a part of this team until he's not. I think what the Falcons are seeing, though, is a lot of teams are reaching out about his availability. There is a big market for him, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that he does have that potential to be that mega tight end that we see in the NFL that these elite teams have, right? The Travis Kelce's, the all of a sudden what's I can't
Kittle.
Remember. Yes, George Kittle, right? That name I didn't remember, right? These big guys that command a lot of respect and a lot of money, but they produce every single week. Pitts has the potential, and we've seen it. We saw it in 2024, and it was maybe people didn't pay attention to that 4-game streak with him. That was probably the best 4 games he's had since his rookie year with Matt Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Penix wants him here, right? Like, and that maybe that changes the minds of how they approach possibly trading him, because Michael Penix wants him here. People may have been pissed off with his first interception being Pitts' fault. Penix doesn't care. He wants him here, right? Like that. He understands the upside of that. So,
and he trusted him the week after, Jeff, on the most important play of the game, season on the line, 4th and goal, went to Pitts.
But even earlier in that game, right? Pitts had a play where he just gave up on the route, and I think it turned into another interception, right? But when the game on the line, he still went right back to him, right? So, it's one of those where I think everybody sees the potential, and I think a big wake up call for Fontenot and for Raheem was Andy Reid calling and saying, "Hey, this dude available?"
That's a compliment right there. If
100%.
Andy Reid or Bill Belichick ever call you for a player, I know Belichick's not in the league, that kind of tells you have something.
So, I think that phone call maybe woke them up, but I think it's all going to come down to what they're offered. What's his attitude coming into this year, right? Coming into this new league year. Is he going to show up for workouts? Is he going to be a part of this team? Is he? But if somebody says, "Hey, we'll give you a 2nd-round pick for him or a 3rd-round pick for him," they may jump at it, right? Because ultimately, you're going to have to pay the dude a year from now, and he's going to have a market, and he's not going to get $2 or $3 million a year. Like, are you comfortable with paying Kyle Pitts based upon what he did his first 4 years? Are you comfortable looking ahead and giving him, 5 years, $70 million? I don't know that I would be, to be honest with you. Again, we've got sample sizes of how great he could potentially be, but we also have a lot more sample sizes of the dude just not giving a shit. And
that's scary.
It is 100%. And Arthur Blank, he does not like, you can go back to 2006, 2005, 6, whatever it is with Mike Vick. He doesn't like giving guys money when they haven't shown that they are all in, right? He gave a lot of money. Is it fair 20 years later to bring that up? No. But that has stuck with Arthur Blank for 20 years now, right? He gave a shit ton of money to Michael Vick, to a guy who's self-admittedly wasn't all in, right? Like, didn't take practice seriously, wasn't in the playbook, wasn't. And if you look, since then, the Falcons have never given a big contract to guys that they thought were not all in. And so, that's a conversation to have with Kyle Pitts. Is he all in? Only they know that. It doesn't look like it. It looks like he gives up half the time. But there's a market for him. And I think if the Falcons can they're never going to get a 1st-round pick for him. Right? Like, it's just never going to happen. I mean, hell, Deebo Samuel's went for a 5th, right? Like, nobody saw that coming. Because when he's healthy, like, he's probably the best 2 option in the NFL. Again, when he's healthy. So, That guy's going for a fifth. A couple years ago, we saw Nuke go for a fourth or a fifth. So, but if one of these teams comes up and says, "Hey, we've got a third for Kyle Pitts," now you have to start weighing. Well, we either get rid of him for a third now, or we get nothing next year when he walks, because we're not going to give him $15 million a year. So, I think that's the bigger question is what do they see his cap at post 2025? And are they going to be willing to meet those demands? And if the answer is no, you take a third round pick for him now. You take maybe even a fourth round pick for him now. Probably pissed off a lot of people in Atlanta because he's number 4 overall. But
could have had Parsons.
Yeah. Yeah. Good God. But I think that is the answer. The question that they have to answer. And for me, the answer is no, he's not worth $15 million a year. But he will get it. Somebody will give it to him to have those services.
Jeff, I wonder, and not straight up, that won't be a fair trade, but the fact that Hendrickson's on the market, could there be something there where Pitts is involved in a trade for Hendrickson? Obviously, we would have to give more draft capital in that, but if I'm Cincinnati, that, having another weapon there would be amazing.
Yeah, it would, but do they want to spend more, a guaranteed, because again, his fifth year, it's all guaranteed. Again,
yeah,
11,
10 million, something like that.
10, whatever that is, 10, 11, 12, whatever that is, right? And you're much better with numbers than I am. I've said this all the time. I don't understand cap stuff. I'm not intelligent like that. So, but if you're the Bengals, right, like they just with T, for the second straight year, T's getting tagged, which means he's getting $26 million guaranteed. They've got a couple other guys on offense that they're giving a shit ton of money to, right? Are they willing to give up a defensive guy, but then turn around and give a tight end guaranteed $10 million, right? Do they want to spend that kind of money on their offense again? Because we all know offense wasn't their issue last year. That was the number 1 scoring team in the NFL. For me, if I'd had an MVP vote, Joe Burrow would have gotten it. Because to me, that dude, he put up better numbers than everybody in the league last year, but because they couldn't stop anybody, nobody paid attention to him. So I don't know that would even enter into their minds, going defense for offense. But I think if you're going to trade out anybody, I think he's got to be a name that you throw in there, like, hey, we'll give you Kyle Pitts. Right. Like, I think that, we'll give you, whatever their number is, we'll give you 41 plus Kyle for Hendrickson. Take it. Right. I'm sure he's going to be in there just because you get rid of, some money off the books. And then you pick up a guy. And so it's, 2 birds, 1 stone type of scenario. I just don't know, again, with him, that's a lot of money to give a tight end, for a guy who quite honestly, I don't know that he's even earned that 5th year guaranteed. So
what scares me the most, Jeff, is the fact that he could ball out next year. And what if he just, gets that crazy extension from us and just reverts back to whatever the heck he did at the end of this past year?
But and I agree, right? In how many times across sports in general, not even just the NFL, but in general, just across sports, you see guys in contract years just put up insane numbers, right? Like I love baseball. I'm actually here in my son's dorm room, right? My son plays college baseball, so I'm a big baseball guy too. Dansby Swanson, like I'm a big Dansby guy. Known Dansby since he was 16. His contract here with the Braves. What did he do? Came out absolutely insane year, got a shit ton of money from the Cubs. Offensively hasn't been what he was 3 years ago, right? And so, yeah, I think you run that potential to have that happen with Kyle Pitts, especially because, again, Michael Penix wants him here. Michael Penix has shown that he will target him 7-8 times a game, right? Like he will be involved in the offense like that. You really think, based upon what small sample size we have, 9 loves number 5 and he loves number 8, right? Like those are his 2 dudes. And those seems to be the 2 guys that he's got the most chemistry with and the most comfortability with. So is it out of the realm of possibility to see him next year be number 2 in targets with the Falcons. It wouldn't be shocking at all based upon what we saw to end the year last year with Penix, right? So I still think the bigger question and this is for Terry Fontenot, GM's worth the shit answer this question every single year. Are you comfortable with giving him the deal that he potentially gets by balling out? Are you comfortable with giving him that 5 year, $70 million with 45, 50 guaranteed for a guy that has literally done a roller coaster his entire career, right? So, and for me, the answer would be no. And because that answer is no, I'll give him to the highest bidder this year. If it's a 4th round, it's a 4th round, right? But it's better than letting him walk for nothing after 2025.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there. Let's go, Jeff. Let's wrap up with the draft so that you can go spend quality time with your son. I don't want to take up too much of your time. So let's say Falcons keep that 15th overall pick. I know you mentioned Malachi Starks. I've been hearing Jihad Campbell too at that pick, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know if that's a great fit. Who do you think is the most likely to go as of today, March 6th, 15th overall to the Falcons?
So I have been told post-combine, okay, their board has not changed. Right now, if they keep the pick, which is never guaranteed with Terry Fontenot, okay, if they keep the pick and Starks is on the board, that is who they are taking. They truly believe he is one of the greatest safety prospects of all time.
All time.
Holy. And that's a direct quote. That is not me putting like ad-libbing. That was the text I got in quotation marks was all time. They believe he's better potentially, right? Like as a prospect, they believe he's better than the Minkah Fitzpatrick's, that he's actually up there with what's his name? Mr. Lovely Hair out of USC.
Polamalu?
They think that he's up in that conversation with Polamalu's, the Ed Reeds, like the Sean Taylors. Like they think he's in that echelon of safeties.
Wow.
So like they think really highly of him. And if he's on the board at 15, and there's a chance he's not, by the way, there's a chance he's gone before 15. I mean, that's who that's right now as they get ready to go into these private workouts and these pro days. Nothing that happened at the combine changed who's number 1 right now on their draft board. It Starks.
Do you know who would be 2?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Well,
we haven't gotten that because they're still kind of reevaluating where they're at after the combine. I mean, they were really busy at the combine on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like everybody knows that. That's not me breaking any news. They had 45 interviews. All of them were defensive guys. They didn't interview a single offensive guy. They did have offensive people there at the combine. That whole report was nonsense. Hell, they had 3 offensive staff members who were working the combine, for Christ's sake, right? So, but this is going to be a defense-heavy draft for them. But I also, if you had to tell me, do they draft Starks or do they move back? I think they probably move back, right? Because they gave up, between Cousins, between giving New England for Judon, right? Like they lost several picks for this year. So if they can move back into the bottom half of that draft or that first round and pick up one of those additional picks that they lost, they'll 100% do that, right? Like they will absolutely trade back because this draft is deep enough at certain spots where they're looking that they believe they can still get an immediate impact guy at the bottom half of this draft that they could have gotten at 15. By bottom half of this draft, I mean bottom half of the first round, right? Mm-hmm. Like that 22 to 30 range. If they can pick up additional picks that they lost this year because of those two, I think they absolutely do that. So I'm not convinced that they stay at 15. I think 15 might even be a pipe dream at this point because they will use that to try to get, to try to address pass rush because that's something that they wanted to address. That's something that they're wanting to move on. And so I don't think the Falcons end up drafting at 15, to be honest with you. Just my gut feeling. That's not any inside information. Just based upon the totality of everything that I'm hearing, everything that I'm seeing, I would be shocked if come draft day here in a month and a half, almost I guess about a month and a half, if they're still at 15 drafting a player.
But if I told you Malachi was there at 15, they're taking him. Or do you think they'll trade back and try to get him at a later pick?
I think with the way that I think if he's there at 15 and nobody's offering them what they're looking for, they would take him.
Right.
So like that's but I don't think that that's the plan right now. I think they really do want to try to pick up additional draft picks. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, right now Starks is still number 1 on their draft board.
Something tells me that this pick's going to be traded, though. If I had to
100%.
guess,
100%. I firmly believe that. Again, I don't. Inside information is not why I'm saying I think they address pass rush in free agency. And to do that, I think they get rid of 15, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Whether you pick up one of those 3 guys, I would drop. There isn't a player at 15 available that is as good as any of those 3 guys, including the 30-year-old Hendrickson.
Yeah, and not only that, but that could walk in 2025 and be an immediate impact player for us, right? Because
not a bust like Judon was. Like those 3 guys are instant impact. They changed that defensive locker room the moment they walk in the door. And there's just not a guy in the draft right now that does that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just in the NFL, right? Like there's a reason that this isn't the NBA, right? Like the NBA drafts guys, hopefully 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road they turn into something. NFL guy, you would rather go get that vet who's performed at an all-pro level for 5 years versus drafting a rookie who has a bigger upside, right? But you've got to help get them there. And we all know that, and I don't think most GMs are insane enough to not understand that. Helping a guy realize his upside doesn't happen a whole lot. Hell, Kyle Pitts is yet to see his upside here in Atlanta, right? Like it's just, it is what it is. So if you can go get an instant impact guy and you got to give up 15 to go get it, see you. Like you're doing it.
And you're absolutely right. Whichever one of those 3 we get, I mean, they're instantly going to add credibility to that D-line. Hendrickson led the league in sacks last year. Yep. So, that we need some. I mean, we had that one fluke season with Vic Beasley when he led the league in sacks. But other than that, we haven't had a serious, pass rushing threat since John Abraham, probably.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about the guys that have led this team in sacks over the last 15 years, right? Like the Croy Biermans, like dudes that just didn't materialize out. They had a little bit of success here, but didn't do anything, right? And so, if you've got to give up 15 this year to go get a guy that has that kind of impact, and he can give you 3 or 4 years, because Hendrickson, at 30, 31 probably has 3 or 4 good years left.
Yeah. And maybe he won't even cost 15. Maybe you can get him for a second and Pitts or a second and a third. I don't know. Yeah. We'll see how that all shakes out. But definitely excited for next Monday when we can start legally tampering, and hopefully we don't do any illegal tampering over the weekend because we can't afford to lose any more draft capital.
And if we do, just keep your mouth shut. There's no need for you to come do an opening press conference about how you were talking to everybody and I don't know, talk to my agent.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Just happy to be here.
Simple. Don't cost us a 5th round pick, man.
Right.
But anyways, Jeff, you're incredible. Thank you so much. To the audience, again, at JMB_CU16 is where you can find Jeff with all the latest Falcons news. Jeff, thanks again, and looking forward to all your off-season commentary yet to come.